So let's get reaction to the DPI and many other things with our next guest. Please welcome Charles Michel, President of the European Council. How are you? And as we get settled, let me say that we will be taking some audience questions here. So use your app and send some to us. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate your being here. So we've heard a couple of fascinating things this morning already. Let's talk first about Ukraine. Beleaguered on the battlefield, huge new offensive from the Russians, clearly having some impact on Ukrainian morale. Is it also further weakening, in your opinion, support for Ukraine in Europe?
I can tell you that in the European Council, the 27 European leaders, we are absolutely determined because we know what's at stake, we understand what's at stake, and you know that at the EU's level, we need to decide by unanimity when it comes to Ukraine, for instance. And since day one, we have been making decisions by unanimity in terms of military support, which is new for the EU. It's a fundamental decision we made a few days following the full-scale invasion. And more recently, you know that we decided to grant the candidate status to Ukraine, very strong geopolitical signal, and we decided to mobilize an additional package of 50 billion euros. But this is not enough. We have to do more. And I was following the numbers and the polls, and it shows that in our 27 democracies, the political leaders, they have the responsibility to explain and to try to convince our people that what we are doing in support for Ukraine, this is not only a question of generosity, it's also a question of common interest.
So do you think that support will last as long as it needs to last?
Yes, I think so, and I think that this will be a crucial choice for the next European team following the European elections. And I'm very confident that the next European team will understand that this is fundamental to support Ukraine. I give you one other example. You know that for decades across the EU, there was this debate about the possible European defense and the possibility to invest more and to develop this political project. But in fact, we were not able to make significant steps. I think that today, this is a totally different situation. From a political point of view, the overall thinking is totally different. Why? Because of the full-scale invasion. And because we have seen how it was difficult for the United States to make a decision on this financial package, the 60 billion euros. And we understand that we have to do more for our own security. And that's why, even if I do not underestimate the challenges and the difficulties, I'm not naive. But on the other hand, I think that at the EU's level, when we face serious challenges, we understand that we need to act.
So your predecessor said that Europe was in a pre-war era. Is it ready?
I think that we are more ready than we were 1 year or 2 years before, but we are not ready enough. And that's why I think that if I have a look at the fundamental priorities for the years to come at the EU's level, there are 3 fundamental topics. For sure, the values, democratic principles, this is the foundation of this political project. For sure, the economic development, the economic base, this is fundamental. If you want to be strong, if you want to be influential, we need to develop our economic base. And there's a third pillar, this is defense and security. And here, there is something which is positive. I think that more than before, the political leadership at the national level across the EU, we understand that we need to invest more in the field of defense, in the field of security, to be more resilient, point one. But there is another aspect that we will need to improve. This is the European industrial base. And here there's a question of financing, and the leaders, we are addressing those challenges. For instance, we are opening the door for the European Investment Bank. That could be a very powerful tool to invest much more in the future in this defense sector. Because if we want to be credible in the field of defense, we need an industrial base, and today we are too fragmented in that field.
So the European elections, as mentioned by some of our previous speakers, are coming up shortly, and it's expected that fringes on the right and left are going to gain power. Is that in part a reflection of what we saw in that poll? disillusionment with government and the sense that governments are now serving minorities rather than the majority of their population?
No, I would like to be careful with the polls, because if you would have followed the polls, Brexit would have not taken place. Donald Trump would have not been president of the United States. That's why we need to be careful. And I also remember that 5 years ago, a few weeks before the European elections, all of us, we were expecting a big victory for the extreme political parties, and finally it was not the case. Let's see what will be the outcome. But one thing is certain: the voters, the citizens, the people, they are expecting us, the political leaders at the European level and at the national level, to deliver. And what are the main tasks? Security, peace, security, and improving the conditions of life, economic growth and social cohesion. This is the challenge we face. And if I have a look at the recent years, at the EU's level, I don't say that everything was perfect, but we did a lot, and we have been facing a serious difficulties, but we did a lot.
So are you predicting that the left and the right will not make significant gains in the election?
I'm not too obsessed by the polls. You know, I'm a politician.
I'm not talking about the polls. I'm asking about your sense of the population.
I sincerely think that the next European Parliament will be very strong to defend and to support Ukraine, very strong to defend the rule of law, and very strong to defend a bold European Union. And I still think that there will be a clear majority in favor of those fundamental principles.
Do you think that a mainstream politician, a centrist, should make alliances with parties on the right in order to gain political power? Is that damaging to democracy?
No,
see that happening?
What is important, in my opinion, this is the policy, this is the substance, and what are the decisions we are making. I don't want to give one concrete example, but I remember that sometimes in the Council, when there were elections in one member state, there were some doubts and some worries, and then we have seen that it was possible to work with the leadership of countries, including when in one coalition you have some political parties more oriented to the right of the political landscape.
So you're okay with, if it's expedient, to ally then with people on the far right? The question in the European Parliament will be: what are the political parties ready to cooperate, to collaborate, to support Ukraine, to defend the democratic principles, and to make the EU stronger? And if I'm observing the reality of those political parties that you qualified at the far right, the reality is sometimes a bit more balanced, and some of those personalities within those parties are personalities with whom it is possible to cooperate because they can share the same goals, the same views on those topics, and with some others, it's, in my opinion, not possible to cooperate. So is there a way for centrists to regain more the trust and confidence of more of the electorate?
Yeah, I think this is a fundamental question, because we can see that in today's politics, this may be more difficult for some rational political parties and rational personalities to convince. And sometimes this is easier to play with the emotions, to try to rally the support of the people. But I'm still confident that centrist parties, they have a central role to play for the EU's future. And I know that this is usual. A few weeks before the elections, that we are worried and that we think that the worst will come. I am a bit more calm, I'm a bit more serene, and I'm certainly confident that following the elections, the European leadership will have to take two major decisions. On the one hand, what is the political program for the 5 years to come? And the 27 heads of states are working very hard for months about this political program for the 5 years to come, and who will be those who will assume the responsibilities. And those decisions will be made in the weeks to come, in the weeks following the European elections in June.
Several audience questions. Let me get to some of them. How do we ensure a balance between providing full support for the Ukrainian government's defense and combating corruption in Ukraine?
Yeah, I think that we need to do both, and I think that the fact that we decided to grant the candidate status to Ukraine, and I hope that in June we can start the real negotiations with this first intergovernmental meeting that is supposed to take place. I think is the best encouragement for the Ukrainians to make the reforms that are needed, and I'm absolutely certain that without this prospect of this EU membership, it would be much more difficult to convince the Ukrainian authorities to do what is needed. And you know that. I'm in very close contact and in constant contact with Volodymyr Zelensky and his team, and I know how they are dedicated to do everything which is needed to implement the reforms that are needed, including in the field of the fight against corruption. And it's absolutely fundamental also because it will help us to convince our public opinion, our citizens across the EU and across the United States probably, that we are right to support Ukraine because they are using in the right way the financial means we provide to them to defend themselves, but also to defend our common future and our common fundamental values.
I want to ask you about Georgia. Massive protests there over the foreign influence bill that probably will get approval perhaps today. What's that going to do to the prospects of Georgia becoming a member of the EU?
Look, I would like to be frank. I'm personally disappointed by what's going on in Georgia. Why? Because a few years ago, I had the occasion to play a role to try to help to unblock the political system that was totally blocked. Point one. Point two. A few months ago, I can tell you that in the European Council, the 27 member states, there was no majority to support the candidate status for Georgia. But together with some European leaders, we were convinced that for many reasons it was the right choice to grant the candidate status to Georgia. And we have been working a lot, including with the Georgian authorities, and to convince them to implement some reforms that were absolutely needed. And they made some important steps last year and by the end of last year, and we granted the candidate status. And only a few weeks later, we are observing this attempt to pass this legislation. Let's see what will be done by the president, because she has a veto right, point one. Point two, we are observing a certain rhetoric, which is not a positive rhetoric, I would say. We are in contact with the Georgian authorities. I sincerely hope that the Georgian authorities will make the clarity about their intentions. But if they want to get closer to the EU, if they want to join the EU, they have to respect the fundamental principles of the rule of law and the democratic principles. We have to be clear, and we are very clear, and I sincerely hope that we will succeed to convince them to fulfill the conditions that are needed to join the EU.
We have another question about Georgia. In fact, we have several. This one is not only for your assessment of the situation which you've given, but your thoughts on how the West can prevent Russian influence from affecting Georgia.
Yes, this is very clear that the Russian purpose is to undermine everywhere where it is possible the democratic principles, or the attempt to strengthen the rule of law. And that's why we need to support all those in Georgia. And I know that a vast majority of the Georgian people, they want to get closer to the EU. They want to join the EU. And they have to feel that we are supporting them, and that we are doing everything which is possible to counter those Russian attempts to undermine this Georgian dream to become a member of the EU.
Someone else asks what you have to say to the youth in all generations who are now protesting in Tbilisi.
Yeah, that we are on the side of the rule of law. We are on the side on the freedom, on the democratic principle, and we intend to use the tools we have in our possession to try to convince the Georgian authorities to do what is needed. There will be elections in Georgia in the months to come, and I sincerely hope that those elections will be also an occasion to give a legitimacy and to give a clear signal what is the direction they want for their country.
Another audience member asks, are you expecting major changes in the EU agenda if President Trump wins?
The simple fact that the question is asked is very interesting, in my opinion, because in fact, if we believe, which is my case, in the European sovereignty, in the European strategic autonomy, we should consider that we have to be master of our own future, of our own destiny, and it shows that.
But you've had a very close, and some would say dependent, relationship with the U.S., and President Trump has said, Putin, do what you want to do in Europe.
Yeah, but I'm very clear that the United States and the EU, we are a very close ally, and this is very important.
And will remain so?
And this is extremely, we are a very close ally, and this is very important. But on the other hand, we can see that on some topics, the EU, we have our own vision, we have our own interests. Do you remember when Donald Trump was president, in the field of climate change, for instance, we didn't have exactly the same vision about what was needed at the international level. Another example, on Iran, for instance, we had not the same views about what was needed to maintain a certain channel of communication with Iran. But this is very clear that with Donald Trump or without Donald Trump, one thing is absolutely certain. The absolute priority for this political generation across the EU, in my opinion, is a more resilient EU, a more influential EU. It means that we have to be a credible partner, a credible ally. That's why it's important to invest more in defense and security, to assume more responsibilities. On the other hand, if I have a look at the economic situation, at the economic base, I think that in the future, for the next European Commission, for the next European leadership, it will be extremely important to be much more efficient in terms of strengthening the single market and strengthening the capacity to innovate in Europe.
President Charles Michel of the European Council, thanks so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.